What is poppin' YouTube? Bringing you another video talking about some players that are skyrocketing up my dynasty rankings after NFL free agency. Starting off with guy number one, and that's going to be George Pickens. George Pickens has Russell Wilson and Justin Fields coming into that quarterback room, and instantly, it's an instant upgrade over Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky and Mason Rudolph. So shout out to George Pickens for not only having number one, that massive opportunity for him to happen, and number two, then we add in the fact that Diontae Johnson gets traded to the Carolina Panthers, who was probably the biggest target hog competition that George Pickens had on this team. Now you're going to say to me, Caleb, well, of course, George Pickens, he's an alpha level wide receiver. Why are you super excited about George Pickens? Because this is what happened with George Pickens last year. He led the NFL in contested catch rate as a rookie. He averaged more yards per reception than DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman Jr. last year. And he also averaged 6.1 yards after catch, which was 8th among wide receivers. Like I said, by removing Kenny Pickett, inserting Justin Fields, George Pickens has legit wide receiver one upside in year 3. Now, if we look at George Pickens on Player Profiler, wide receiver 36 on his sophomore campaign, wide receiver 48, 5 total receiving touchdowns, 18.1 yards per reception. Now, if we look at his measurables, 6'3", 200 pounds, coming out of the University of Georgia, the biggest thing that happened with George Pickens was a lot of people were thinking that he was a little bit of a head case, a little bit of a diva wide receiver. Plus, he had come off a torn ACL, so he wasn't able to fully show himself as a senior at the University of Georgia. Now, when we're looking at George Pickens and what is to be projected right now, like I said, why is he skyrocketing up my rankings? Where was he before Caleb? Where was he now? So currently, right now, George Pickens is sitting as my wide receiver 24. If you would have asked me before free agency and Diontae Johnson getting traded, where was George Pickens in my rankings? He was right at wide receiver 29. He was behind guys like Debo and Jaden Reed. And George Pickens, boom, absolutely has blasted past them, skyrocketed up my rankings. So I love some George Pickens. First guy that's skyrocketing up my rankings. My second guy skyrocketing up my rankings is Hollywood Brown, who Hollywood Brown, a lot of people thought were led for dead based on the fact that he hadn't signed anywhere. A lot of these other wide receivers had landed in other better opportunities in free agency. And then my man Hollywood signs with the Kansas City Chiefs, the queen of the ball. Walk on down, Hollywood Brown. Now, Hollywood Brown, at this point, before free agency, my wide receiver 42. I had talked about him as a good buy low opportunity about a month ago because I did think he was going to land in a better situation. But man, I could not have imagined him landing on the Kansas City Chiefs. Ended up, after this ends up happening, goes from wide receiver 41 to my wide receiver 33. He's right now in the mix, ahead of guys like Christian Kirk, ahead of guys like Cooper Kupp in my dynasty rankings, which you might be like, Caleb, like, of course he's ahead of Cooper Kupp. He's young. But Hollywood Brown, we're looking at a guy who absolutely thrives on catching the ball deep. When we're looking at him the last 2 seasons, of course, we've seen the projection. We saw what he was with Baltimore. He never really turned into that elite level wide receiver in Arizona, but he did put up wide receiver 21, 14.1 fantasy points per game, 13 fantasy points per game in 2021, 2022, 2023, only 9.6 fantasy points per game. Now, you didn't have Kyler Murray for a lot of the season. I can't really give a lot of excuses for Hollywood Brown and his lack of production because if we look at his overall opportunity, productivity, efficiency metrics, they're not great. But we do know that Hollywood Brown, he's not a target hog, but he can get deep real quick with his 4.34 yard, 40 yard dash. And you put that type of speed. When MVS signed with the Chiefs, the whole dynasty community was super excited about it. But the difference between MVS and Hollywood Brown is Hollywood Brown's actually shown that he's like a good wide receiver. Now, there are questions about his hands, about his focus. I hear all of that. But Hollywood Brown on the Chiefs, boom, 26 years old, still about to enter the prime of his career. This could be like a mini Stephon Diggs leaving the Minnesota Vikings to go to the Buffalo Bills where we had seen the flashes and then boom, all of a sudden he puts it together. So I absolutely have Hollywood Brown skyrocketing up my rankings. Yes, is it the best landing spot for a free agent wide receiver? It is, but I think he's skyrocketing up my rankings. Now, moving on to a different position, we have the running back position, and Josh Jacobs is the first guy that's skyrocketing up my dynasty rankings. I have Josh Jacobs as my RB9 in dynasty. If you would have asked me about a week ago where Josh Jacobs was, he was right hovering around my RB14. Now, the running back landscape, like we know, it's very dire. A lot can change. But when we look at Josh Jacobs getting the contract from the Green Bay Packers, not only does he get the contract on a great team like the Green Bay Packers offense, young and blossoming, where they need an absolute bell cow, they let go of Aaron Jones. So all of a sudden, Josh Jacobs is going to be a guy that we've seen have top 5 fantasy football upside, and he's got the contract, and yes, is he getting up there in age? He is. But if we look at for the next 2 seasons, who are you taking Josh Jacobs over? Like I said, I had Josh Jacobs literally jumps guys like James Cook, Isaiah Pacheco, Kenneth Walker. Those are guys that he instantly skyrockets over. So I absolutely love some Josh Jacobs skyrocketing in my rankings. Shout out to the Green Bay Packers. Shout out to everything that the Green Bay Packers organization has had to do since Aaron Rodgers with Jordan Love. Absolutely love it. But like I said, with Josh Jacobs, he has had that top 3 finish. So we'll have to see where that ends up fitting in over the next few seasons. My next player that's skyrocketing up my rankings is going to be Tony Pollard. And Tony Pollard in my rankings was left for absolute freaking dead. But Tony Pollard was essentially in my E tier behind guys like Zach Charbonnet. He was like in the Zach Charbonnet, Raheem Mostert line in my Dynasty rankings. And then he jumps a whole tier where he's right now right behind Alvin Kamara in the rankings. Now, I think the contract that Tony Pollard got was absolutely atrocious. I think there's no reason to be paying Tony Pollard, a running back of his age, a running back that's 26 years old, that really this last year had a really down year, RB23 on a points per game basis, a ton of points, but I mean, a 252 rushing attempts, 1,000 yards, 6 total touchdowns. I just don't see. I think the touchdown upside, he now has to split the backfield with Tajay Spears. Last year was finally the bell cow without Ezekiel Elliott, and he wasn't able to capitalize. So maybe he does need to split some touches. But when we're looking at him, he was RB7 on snap share, RB6 on weighted opportunities, RB7 on carries, and he literally wasn't able to even put up a top 10 finish. So for me, I really was leaving Tony Pollard for dead. But now of the fact that we bumped him up into our rankings, like I said, he was RB28 and instantly gets bumped up to RB23. Absolutely love some Tony Pollard as he's skyrocketing up my rankings. So if you need a productive veteran, go get a guy that has a contract that has a little bit of longevity. I think Tony Pollard definitely is skyrocketing up my rankings. It doesn't mean that I absolutely love some Tony Pollard, but it does mean there is a chance for Tony Pollard to just continue to capitalize on that dynasty value on that contract. Now, let us flip to 3 more players that are skyrocketing up my rankings. The first guy we're going to be talking about is Deshaun Watson for the Cleveland Browns. Now, the biggest concern that I had with Deshaun Watson is not the fact that you got to worry, is he ever going to return to old Deshaun Watson? Are the Cleveland Browns maybe not going to commit to him? Are they going to bring Joe Flacco back? Are there going to be question marks? Now, of course, the Cleveland Browns bringing in Tyler Huntley, there is some competition for backup snaps, and maybe they end up beating out Deshaun Watson if things go south. But right now on Keep Trade Cut, Deshaun Watson is QB23. Before all this happened, I had Deshaun Watson as my QB21. After everything occurred, he is now as my QB19. So I still like some Deshaun Watson. The contract, the offense that he is playing in makes me really excited for Deshaun Watson. If you actually take the games that he played with Patrick Mahomes through the first 9 weeks, Deshaun Watson was only 1 points per game difference between Patrick Mahomes. Now, did that end up flipping when Patrick Mahomes absolutely went crazy over the second half of the season? Yes. And it wasn't even a great year for Patrick Mahomes. But what I'm saying is Deshaun Watson is still a valuable quarterback in Superflex leagues. You got Nick Chubb coming off of injury. We just got Jerry Jeudy traded there. You still got David Njoku, Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore. Yeah, let's see what they do in the draft. But I absolutely love some Deshaun Watson and his current dynasty value. And I think he's skyrocketing up my ranking. So I'm definitely buying him a lot of places. Then we move to the next guy, and it's going to be Baker Mayfield. And Baker Mayfield, shout out to Baker Mayfield, left for dead in Cleveland, goes to Carolina, left for dead there, has like 1 good game for the Rams with Matthew Stafford out, and then boom, signs with the Tampa Bay Bucks and becomes a really mid-level quarterback play. I had Baker Mayfield right around QB24. I was a little bit worried about, is he going to land back with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? If not, where does he end up going? Boom, lands with Tampa Bay. Instantly gets bumped up to my QB21. Definitely if you are a team where you need a solid QB2, I think tearing down from like maybe a guy like Tua to get to Baker Mayfield, and maybe you can get a late first. Like those are deals that I'm looking to do because Baker Mayfield has skyrocketed to a point where I'm super excited to see what he can do this next year with Tampa Bay, with Mike Evans and that connection. Now I hope he can throw the ball a little bit more to Chris Godwin, who is my boy, but QB 17 on points per game basis last year. Can he get finished as a QB 15? I think that's definitely in his range of outcomes. We'll have to see how he does without Dave Canales, but we'll see what else the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have in store with free agency. And my last and final player skyrocketing up my rankings is going to be Evan Engram, who Evan Engram is more. It's not the fact that Evan Engram switched teams. It's the fact that Evan Engram was able to now move into the second receiving option in this Jacksonville Jaguars offense. You got Calvin Ridley moving away. You got Christian Kirk and Evan Engram. And if we remember a few seasons ago, Evan Engram absolutely popped off in his first season with the Jacksonville Jaguars, where he was the tight end 7 back in 2022. And then in 2023, he was the tight end 4 on a points per game basis. And now we just got their essentially alpha level wide receiver out of there. And so we're saying to yourself, Maybe this sucks for the Jaguars' overall offense, but this is not going to suck for my man, Evan Engram. Now, granted, he did have 143 targets in 2023 compared to in 2022 where he only had 98. I just think he is getting into this prime of his career where he is 29 years old. We are looking at a guy this season that could absolutely take what we saw with the Giants and that him as a rookie and a sophomore and just absolutely continue to build on this really roller coaster type career that in Jacksonville has absolutely turned into a fantasy football darling. So love some Evan Engram. Like I said, right now in my Dynasty rankings, before this, if you would ask me where Evan Engram was, Evan Engram probably was somewhere around my tight end 14. But right now he has moved up to my tight end 11. So only 4 spots. So maybe not considerably like an absolute rocket beam, but I could even see him, depending on what happens here over the NFL draft, a few guys, some of these tight ends land in these spots that maybe push some guys down. I could see him moving up even to maybe my top 10 tight ends here over the next few weeks. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. Hit that like button and that subscribe button. We're continuing to put out content about Dynasty Fantasy Football each and every week. If you did not see my video yesterday where I talked about Dynasty sells, that video is going to be right here where I walk through a ton of Dynasty sells that you probably should be looking to get out of into other assets. Go tune in. Let me know what you think. Catch you on the next one. Peace.